Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a program called An Hour with Álvaro Somoza, myself. As always, and very humbly, I want to ask you to allow us to enter your homes and offices in order to share with you important issues and stories, analysis of current events, commentaries, as well as clarification of our recent history. This program is based solely on one rule, and only one rule: to tell you, the audience, the truth. Understanding that the truth is always the truth, even if no one believes it, just as much as a lie is always a lie, even if everyone believes it. I want to make sure that we understand the purpose of this program, because generally this program is done in Spanish. However, this particular video is geared to be sent to people in power, people who are making decisions, people who are financing different interests on behalf of the United States government. The purpose really behind this video is to say to the United States that we Nicaraguans want to request that you consider acting in a more forcefully and deliberately against the criminal actions of the Ortega Murillo dictatorship. The truly criminal behavior of the Ortega Murillo couple could be easily considered neurotic and psychotic. Please keep in mind that the U.S. Congress has passed laws that have authorized mechanisms such as the NICA Act H.R. 5708, the Majinsky Act S. 284, and of course, Renacer Act S. 1064, that provide sufficient capabilities for the application of stronger sanctions than those applied to date. The goal should be to motivate the regime to look for a peaceful, moderate, legal, and democratic solution to the internal discord with the majority of Nicaraguan folks both living in the country and living overseas. The Ortega Murillo dictatorship needs to reduce their unconstitutional powers. We, the people of Nicaragua, need to have a more even correlation of forces with that of the regime. This will stop, or at least reduce, the galloping repression in order to begin moving towards the reestablishment of the democratic order until we can come to a peaceful solution to the political problems. Only with the necessary real-time conditions and guarantees can we be allowed, or we are willing to take the risk of going in country to exercise our political actions and achieve a free election. Nobody is going to go to Nicaragua and pretend to do that under the current set of circumstances. There is no way that anybody would take that chance. At this point, you might ask yourself, how come there's a member of the Somoza family speaking about dictatorships to us? Well, I'm the middle son of a former president of Nicaragua from 1957 to 1963. My father's name was Luis Somoza de Baile, and my mother, Isabel Urcullo. I take what I'm saying from my parents. My parents, both deceased now. were true liberals. Liberals in the sense of what the movement represented during the 19th century. They were truly democratic. You can't have a dictatorship with a president who's supposedly a dictator and yet issued 6 amnesties to all those armed rebels, hundreds of them, who tried to topple his government. He was a young president in the mid-30s. As president, Luis Somoza passed a constitutional amendment that prohibited re-election. He created the Social Security system, promulgated the minimum wage laws and paid vacation laws into the labor code. He created and organized the Central Bank of Nicaragua, the Savings and Loan Institute that provided homes for the middle class and for many others. He also appointed one of the most illustrious Supreme Court we have ever had in Nicaragua. At one point, the people of Nicaragua popularly referred to that court as the Golden Court. He also pioneered the central bank integration. He pioneered the Central American Integration Treaty that today is of great economic importance to the region's development. When his constitutional term ended in 1963, 6 years after he had taken over, he stepped down after a peaceful and democratic election placed Dr. René Schick in office. Those years were the most peaceful and progressive period of our history. This is the man who taught me the values I possessed. He is responsible for my political thoughts, and my mother is responsible for the character and the dignity I possess today. That's what motivates me to ask you for your help. I want to pose a series of questions to you that will make you truly see the problem we have in Nicaragua. When you compare it to that of the United States, as people, we're all the same. We wish to have the same rights, the same protection under the law. What would you think is the questions I'm going to ask you? What would you think if the following things were done in the United States today? If law enforcement forces were to arbitrarily murder more than 400 unarmed American citizens for marching in protest against, say, a new tax or an illegal taxation on the American retirees' pensions. That's what happened in Nicaragua. The police forces came out over the course of 2 weeks and murdered about 350 to 400. We don't know the exact number because some of them disappeared. But the police knows where they are. Would the federal government in the United States be free to prosecute the Catholic Church in general by persecuting dozens of parish priests and throw them in jail? We literally have, I think the last time I counted, over 17 priests in jail for giving sermons in their church. There's no official accusation against them, but they're in jail. And they sentenced one of the most beloved monsignors of the church, Rolando Alvarez, to a 26-year jail term as As of January 2nd, 2024, there are 17 members of the Catholic Church in jail, including Monsignor. All right? That is a reality today. What would you say or do if at one of the largest marches in Washington, in Nicaragua, just to put it in perspective, Mother's Day March is a big march in Managua, the capital of the country. This particular year, 2018, on the 30th of May, over 400,000 Nicaraguans were in attendance. I was there. I saw the sea of people on one of the main drag of Nicaragua, of Managua. Yet, at the end of that march, in a rotonda, in a roundabout, the government trained members of the Nicaraguan armed forces were to murder in cold blood 18 of those in attendance with high-powered sharpshooters rifles. This it's in the news. It's nothing new. They actually got these people up on the lights of the stadium and lay there and shot 600 meters away, 500 meters, I don't know, 18 human beings. A bullet in the head, a bullet in the throat, and a bullet in the neck. Classic sharpshooters bullets. That's who the government is today. Would the federal government be free to arbitrarily annul the nationality to more than 300 American-born citizens? Would you think that that can happen here in this country? Would the federal government, imagine President Biden today saying, hey, go and annul the citizenship, exile, and confiscate the property of 300 American-born citizens without any, by the way, any accusations, any trial, any conviction, nothing. Simply by sheer power. That's what's happening in Nicaragua today. So the questions I ask you are to make you think, what would it be like? Can you ever imagine the political conditions in the United States if in the last 5 years, 13% of the American population, let me put it in numbers so that you understand the volume of this. 13% of the population of Nicaragua has left to exile, either self-imposed or by force, purely out of safety, fear, etc. Well, if that were done in this country, it would be an equivalent of 43 million American people. Think about that. 43 million people, in proportionately to the 2 million that left Nicaragua, were forced to migrate for the safety of their lives, leaving behind their belongings, the elderly in their families, and the very young, because they can get jobs in an overseas environment. Can you imagine a police state in the United States that would arbitrarily restrict the freedom of expression, confiscating the assets of newspapers, television stations, internet, you name it, throwing the owners in jail for expressing disapproval of the government policies? Can you see that happening in this country? Well, that's happening in Nicaragua. Even for carrying any size of the Nicaraguan flag, in public, sends you to jail in Nicaragua. Would you stand for a government sent thugs to terrorize small farmers in the Midwest or New York State or anywhere in this country, so that the families would be so horrified that they would leave their properties behind in order for the government to issue new deeds to their cronies. That's happening in Nicaragua today. Well, I can go on and bore you to death, but this is the kind of thing that is happening unjustly, and they're taking place on a daily basis in Nicaragua. The Ortega Murillo dictatorship have complete and utter disregard for all recommendations of human rights organizations regarding the relentless and completely illegal and unconstitutional confiscations of personal property, corporate assets. Imagine that today the building where the Organization of American States was housed, the Organization of American States went to the owner and rented his building. They put their offices in that building, a legal contract. Well, the Nicaraguan government expelled the Organization of American States out of Nicaragua and confiscated the building, the property where they rented to have their offices in Managua. They confiscated that building from the owner just because he rented to the OAS. Countless universities and more than 3,400 NGOs, all arbitrarily confiscated. The Ortega Murillo dictatorship is like an old scratch vinyl record where the needle got stuck in the scratch, repeating the same anti-imperialist cries from the Cold War over and over and over. The oligarchs, the capitalists, you name it. They got stuck there. They haven't moved forward. There is nothing that they can offer the people of Nicaragua. Let me express to you a very sad fact. I talked to a friend of mine who's a writer, an interesting individual in his mid to late 70s. And I asked him if he could take a trip to Guatemala where we could meet. He would go to the airport, get on a plane, fly to Guatemala. We would meet for dinner or lunch, a number of hours, and then the next day he would fly back down to Managua. You know what he said to me? I am afraid to go to the airport and have my passport taken away from me. And if they don't take my passport away, I am afraid that they won't let me in the country back again. Think of an American citizen saying that with the amount of traveling overseas that Americans do. They get to the airport and the authorities take your passport away, saying you're not allowed to leave the country. Or they let you go, and when you come back, they tell the airline, do not load, because that happens. The airline has to send a list of passengers before they can board the passengers, so the government can say this person cannot come back. Ortega has no academic nor professional education. He and his wife are utterly corrupt and criminal. She is really the one with the evil mind, and she's the one in charge. They really are an anachronism of the Cold War. I am a Nicaraguan-born citizen, but I am a U.S. naturalized citizen. I can see different things happening in our countries When I grew up going to college, high school in the States, there was no difference in the morality of our nations. Their current goals, the current goals of this hateful couple, is to make military and commercial alliances with governments that are either adversaries or enemies of the United States. And of course, they make sure that they possess nuclear weapons. At the present time, they are relentlessly looking to involve the Chinese government, not only financially and logistically, but also militarily, which would be a first in the region. The same is being pursued with Iran, North Korea, and Russia, none of whom, by the way, have any relationship whatsoever, culturally, religiously, politically, with Nicaragua. None of them. But they are adversaries or enemies of the United States. Those of us Nicaraguan-born U.S. citizens are extremely worried about a seemingly lack of fortitude the U.S. Central American foreign policy has, which is in total denial of the spirit of the Monroe Doctrine. Let's remember what that was. It was a policy by which the United States said to the European, at the time they were the most invasive societies in the world, the Spanish, the Dutch, the English, you name it. The United States told the Europeans, let the Latin Americans develop themselves. Don't make them into colonies of yours. And sure enough, it worked. It allowed these countries to become self-independent. All of the nations being pursued by the Ortega Murillo dictatorship today are adversaries of the United States, and at least 3 of them possess nuclear weapons. We certainly don't want another Cuba missile crisis in Nicaragua. We would like to try to influence your conscience in order for you to act according to your powers in favor of freedom and democracy. I am not here asking you to invade Nicaragua. I am here asking you to really sanction the country, not with these soft sanctions. You really have to put a very strict sanction on commercial and otherwise, because the Nicaraguans will abuse. Ortega thinks that if you sanction him, he'll do something ridiculous against freedom and democracy. He does that, but he can't really do much more than what he's already done if you block the financial support to his family and his cronies. That's where the real pressure comes in, and you have the power to do that. This is a very serious situation for the people of Nicaragua. 2 million of the 6.5 million people have left the country. 2 million, like I said, equivalent to the United States is about 43 million Americans. That's a serious exile and should be viewed as an extremely dangerous situation for the American government today. Nicaraguans who not only see this problem, if you don't act with more deliverance and forthright on behalf of the United States, we are going to be in serious trouble shortly. The United States, one of the great powers of the world and one of the most giving powers of the world, maintains complex relationships with friendly and hostile nations around the world. In some cases, depending on the political party's philosophy in the White House, the United States interacts with not only governments in Latin America, however, with mutual respect and reciprocity and an enormous spirit of tolerance, the government also discusses issues of importance with us. People like us who are involved in trying to foment freedom and democracy in Nicaragua, but we're doing it from here in the States. I represent a group of no less than 5,000 Nicaraguans who are members of the Alliance for the Freedom of Nicaragua, which is now in an alliance with 7 other organizations called the Vocería de Unidad en Oposición. Political party leaders, dissidents, and civil opposition in Nicaragua have to have communications with you, the United States government. The current situation is regrettable, critical, and offensive to those interested in the stability of our country. Can we have democracy in a socialist country? Of course not. The basis of democracy rests upon our values. Communists, socialists, and corrupt leftists have no values. Their basis is power at any cost. Their lack of faith in God, in moral values, crashes head on, in all cases, with documents of great value to this country, like the U.S. Constitution, the abolition of slavery, universal peace, the Declaration of Independence. Nicaraguans and today in power, the Sandinistas, have no concept of that. The situation cannot be solved by the Nicaraguans alone. Nicaragua is a serious problem, geopolitically speaking. And the reason is very simple. We, as a country in the 20th century, corroborated with the United States in a series of actions which undermined the safety of Nicaragua. All those acts were done in loyalty to the United States. Let me give you some remembrances here. When the United States was helping to overthrow the Arbenz regime in Guatemala, the CIA asked my grandfather to send military tanks in the Nicaraguan army to Guatemala to aid the rebels. We did. When the United States wanted to help the Cuban exilees take over their country again, the U.S. government asked the Nicaraguan government, and my father helped them, created the Bay of Pigs invasion. When different acts of intelligence, be it by the CIA covertly or overtly, the Nicaraguan government always came to the rescue of the United States. That, unfortunately, stopped when President Carter turned his back on the Nicaraguan people. In an alliance with Cuba, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Venezuela, they all turned their back on Nicaragua and in 1979 toppled the constitutional government. Yes, there was a lot of disinformation that the Somozas were a terrible dictatorship, and blah, 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 blah. But today for today, nobody has proven any of the allegations. We've had United Nations inspectors. We've had the Organization of American States inspectors. Nobody ever proved any of the lies put out by the disinformation of the communist-backed Sandinistas against my family, But today, it's not an issue of a family or a dictatorship other than people who want to destroy a nation in order to keep milking the benefits of its people. The Ortega dictatorship is multi-millionaire. They have stolen literally hundreds of millions of dollars from the people of Nicaragua. And I can't excuse the Nicaraguan people from being responsible for that. But we do have, or I should say, when I speak we, in this sense, I'm speaking as an American, we have a duty to help those in need around the world when it comes to freedom and democracy. That is the basis, in a great part, of the American foreign policy. Why am I stating these facts? Because, frankly, I honestly believe that the great majority of Nicaraguans do not deserve the government they currently have. They don't. There are a lot of criticisms made against the people of Nicaragua. Here in Miami, many times I hear members of the staff of different politicians say, you know, the Nicaraguans come here and they complain, and the very first thing they do is criticize another member of another group of Nicaraguans. This is true. Nicaraguans are known to be critical of themselves. Yes, but that's not an excuse for not helping the bulk of the people. The people of Nicaragua are decent people, are human beings, hardworking Christian people. And they have put their lives on the line many a time for U.S. interests. Well, it's time for the U.S. to pay back those interests. Sometimes, like in the case of Nicaragua, the actual dictatorial government was imposed on us as a result of other reasons. And in this case, it was imposed on us because of the Cold War of the 60s, where the constant pounding of the socialist propaganda broadcasted all over the world, but more acutely over Latin America, confused much of the young minds who didn't have the knowledge or the experience to know any better. They simply swallowed the Kool-Aid that the Castro regime and the Soviet Union put out. By virtue of the great alliance with the United States, my father's government allowed our territory to be the launching pad for the Bay of Pigs invasion. Notwithstanding the mortal sin of being an ally to the United States, launching an invasion from the shores of our country to Cuba, even though it was promoted and guided by Cuban citizens, was a silent declaration of war against the Fidel Castro regime. That was the reason why Castro put a lot of his resources in getting revenge. And unfortunately, in 1979, the Carter administration turned its back on our country. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of things wrong with my uncle's government. I'm the first one to admit it. But it didn't deserve to be thrown away the way it was by the Carter administration. Imagine that when General Somoza got to Miami, he was blackmailed by Warren Christopher, the Assistant Secretary of State, to call Nicaragua and obligate the Congress-appointed president, in order to go to the elections, to renounce and give the government to a bandit group of Sandinistas. Otherwise, they would put Somoza in the first plane back to Managua. That is what the U.S. government did under the democratic government of President Carter. He rushed out. He went to the Bahamas, then he went to Guatemala, and then went to Paraguay, where a year later was murdered by the very people that ousted him, the Sandinistas. Today, we have many pseudo anti-Ortega leaders pretending a leadership role in trying to create a narrative of unity in the opposition. That is not true, nor is it real. The group is called Monteverde. It is based in Costa Rica, and it consists of no more than 65 people. However, the false pretense is in their representations that they lead the anti-Sandinista opposition. You know why they're doing that? Because the International Republican Institute and its counterpart of the Democrats, the NDI, both are backing up financially that movement. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. The top cats at Monteverde, the actual heads of Monteverde, are nothing but members of the Movimiento de Renovación Sandinista. That's the Sandinista renovation movement. They happen to hate Ortega, but they're still Sandinistas with the same philosophy as Ortega. They just pretend to be different. They know people don't like them, so they changed their name to Unamos. Let's get us together. Words are not the problem here, it's actions. These are former Sandinistas who upheld Ortega and his thugs from 1970s all the way up to the 90s, where Ortega jumped on his own bandwagon and abandoned these few guys. From then on, they've been separated, but they're still Sandinistas, as their name says, the Sandinista Renovation Movement. These former Sandinista narco criminals of the 80s pretend to lead those who they attacked, betrayed, and pillaged, not to mention murder. The very people they now claim to represent, the leaders of the opposition. I'm confused. How does that work? You murder and pillage people, they don't like you, but yet you represent them? I had a teacher in high school who used to say to things like that, "Boulder Dash, Mr. Somoza." And that's what this is. It's nothing but Boulder Dash. Anything dealing with the Sandinista is despised by the Nicaraguan people. And I'm not going to just say that. I'm going to challenge you to have your American embassy make a poll. Do a polling in Nicaragua. Find a reputable company to do a poll and find out just how legitimate these Sandinista leaders are to the people of Nicaragua. The very leaders of the MRS, the Movimiento Renovación Sandinista, know this. They know that they are not liked, and so they changed their name to UNAMOS. Let's unite. It's all words for them. But 2 million people have left Nicaragua. This is yet another fraud to be perpetrated by evil people who are trying to use good people to achieve what is not achievable in an honest way by them. The problem is partially worsened, ironically, by American institutions such as the International Republican Institute and NDI, and ultimately USAID, who, in the haste of resolving the problem of Nicaragua, have funded the far and beyond worst political group to lead the opposition, when in fact they don't lead the opposition. This is part of the problem we have today. the Nicaraguan people are being lied to. That's the very basic concept, is that they're being lied to. And in my opinion, the United States government cannot ignore that. You think you're doing something for the Nicaraguan people? Think again. Over 800,000 Nicaraguans have fled into the United States since 2018, folks. Since 2018. Over 2 million since 1979. And over 8 million have infiltrated the U.S. government since Biden took over. You think this is just, I'm asking help for me? Remember, I'm a U.S. naturalized citizen, and I'm telling you, my country of birth, led by criminals, narco-traffickers, are sending people to do harm to our nation, the United States of America. And I'm here to tell you, if you don't stop it, we're going to have another 9/11 somehow in this country. And I guarantee you, it's going to be through that corridor. You've heard the news of that Indian-filled airplanes that arrived in France, 300 and some odd passengers. I think 2 planes have been intersected. They're going straight for Nicaragua so that they can sneak in the border in the United States. When is it that you're going to wake up to the fact that this is not a Nicaraguan problem? It's a geopolitical problem that affects Nicaragua, but is aimed to hurt the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the time. I was hoping to give you a clear picture that our fight is not Nicaraguans alone. It's a fight for democracy and for freedom. And I'm just a spokesperson. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.